Are we good?
Yep.
Can you hear him?
Yep. Yep, I can hear him. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to a presentation from one of the most well-loved and well-known speakers, not only just in our area here in Vicariate 5, but across the country. I have had the pleasure of knowing Joe for many years, and I was just teasing him that last Wednesday at our adult confirmation, we were watching a somewhat younger version of Joe Paprocki explain God's library, the Bible, for adult confirmation. So Joe has done numerous books that are just the mainstay and the resource for catechists, for RCIA, for adult confirmation, many areas. But Joe has now written a book that is for the general life in the parish and the transitional time that we are living in. And so I welcome this morning on behalf of the Vicariate 5 Ministry Commission, if everyone from St. Walter's would turn to Father Jim and say, thank you. Because Father Jim and whatever parish you are from, your pastor subscribes to the Vicariate 5 Ministry Commission. And it is through those stipends that we are able to organize and bring in wonderful speakers like Joe to share their great wisdom and experience with you. So without further ado, let me introduce to you my good friend and the source of much wisdom for my life and my ministry, Mr. Joe Paprocki.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and good morning.
Good morning.
It's really an honor and a privilege to be here spending this time with you this morning. As Kathy mentioned, I live in this area of Vicariate 5. I actually live in Evergreen Park. My wife Joanne and I have lived there for about 25 years, and we have two grown children. Our son Mike is married 2.5 years to the granddaughter of this young lady here, Helen Torpy, and our daughter Amy is getting married next month to the son of this young man here. So we have my extended family here this morning, so thank you for being here. Helen is a member of Christ the King. Pat's a member of St. Barnabas Parish. We have a contingent from St. Walter here this morning, including Pastor Father Jim Zidlow. Thank you for being here. Are everyone on this side from St. Walter?
No. Yeah.
Where are you from?
Queen of Martyrs.
Queen of Martyrs Parish. How many are from Christ the King this morning? Okay. St. Barnabas? Pat? And where are you all from?
St.
Germain.
St. Germain?
Queen of Martyrs.
Queen of Martyrs?
St. Damien.
St. Damien. Okay. I think we covered everyone. All right. Welcome. This is really a wonderful opportunity for us to gather together from a number of different parishes and to look at how we can revitalize our parishes and do a number of things to reach out to more people. So I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak to you. I am the National Consultant for Faith Formation for Loyola Press, which is a Jesuit ministry here in Chicago. I've been with Loyola Press now for 15 years. I started my ministry as a high school teacher. Come on in, plenty of room. I started my career in ministry as a high school religion teacher. I taught at the former Quigley South Seminary on 79th and Weston, which is now St. Rita High School. So I was there for 9 years. From there, I went into parish ministry. I was a parish director of religious education at St. Mary of the Assumption Parish, Dalton Riverdale area. Unfortunately, now that parish is closed, as was Quigley South. I have a track record of closing places, so Christ the King is nervous having me around as a parishioner. After St. Mary's, it didn't close while I was there. It closed many years later. I was there for 7 years, and then I went to the Archdiocese of Chicago, and I was a consultant for catechist formation. That's during that time where I met Irene Friend, who is a longtime employee, minister of the Archdiocese of Chicago, and at Christ the King Parish as well. I was there for 5 years, and then for the last 15 years with Loyola Press. And so it's very fitting for me to be working for a Jesuit ministry. I went to a Jesuit high school here in Chicago, St. Ignatius. Went to the Jesuit University, Loyola, Lakeshore campus for my undergrad, went back to Loyola for my master's in pastoral studies. So that's 12 years of Jesuit brainwashing. And now here I am 15 years working with and for the Jesuits. And we have a Jesuit Pope, so everything's kind of lined up pretty good for me. So I'm very thrilled to have people from a number of different parishes here this morning. And I'd like to begin, as I begin many things, I'm a person who loves music. And as I look around the room and just being on the south side of Chicago, I recognize that a number of you are Irish. Raise your hand if you're Irish, okay? Except for a few of us, names like Mundelein and so on. There's a lot of Irish people here. So we're gonna do a little Celtic music here. This is the Celtic Alleluia. And so when you hear it, you'll recognize it. So let's all stand up and get our blood pumping here this morning. Lift our spirits, lift our hearts to just have a little song, something that's easy, we can all join into. And I'm going to come back to that again, because that's one of my 52 ways that we're going to talk about trying to get the church on the move. So I'm drawing from my book this morning called The Church on the Move, 52 Ways to Get Mission and Mercy in Motion. And what I've done is put together a number of ideas that are bite-sized. That every parish can implement to try to revitalize what we do and who we are. There are a number of books out there about revitalizing parishes. There's one called Rebuilt. There's another one called Amazing Parishes. There's another one called Divine Renovation, I think. Wonderful books, but a number of them in their approach, they basically are telling you to go back and implode your parish and build it from scratch. And that's just not going to happen. You know, we're already a church in motion, but we can't just shut down and rebuild our parishes from scratch. We have to sort of rebuild as we're on the move. And so that's what my contribution to this whole discussion of rebuilding parishes is, trying to be more practical and trying to come up with bite-sized things that we can all do. The other thing that I find about a number of these books that are out there and a number of these movements is that they're rather personality-based. They're based on a rock star pastor or a rock star person on the staff who somehow was able to revitalize everything. And I say this pretty much everywhere I go. Come on in, folks. Most of our parishes, and this is not a criticism of our pastors, this is the reality. Most of our pastors are not rock stars. They're good, holy, decent, talented men. And they're doing wonderful work and a good job, but they're not necessarily these rock stars who are going to somehow develop a cult following. They have 10,000 people coming to celebrate Mass just because of the pastor. All right? And a number of these books are written based on the cult of personality. And so once again, I'm talking about how do we develop a parish when the pastor, the staff, the people running it are not rock stars. They're just good, everyday, holy people putting one foot in front of the other. And they're not going to develop this cult of personality, which is actually unhealthy. Because you know what happens if you have a pastor or someone on staff who's a rock star, and you have 10,000 people coming because of that one person? What happens when that person leaves? Parish falls apart. Okay, that's not healthy. So that cult of personality is not something that is advisory. And so again, my 52 ways are trying to circumvent that and say, It doesn't have to rely on one charismatic person to do this. Okay, so let me get started. We're going to go until noon. We'll take a little break at the halfway point. Come on in, welcome.
You found
There's
us.
room on this
You
side
poor
and this
soul.
side.
Yeah. We did not organize a big funeral at the same time.
Yeah, I know
Church
we're
life.
fighting a lot of competition this
Yes.
morning. I tried to tell people not to pass away on this weekend. Folks, they just do what they want to do. But yeah, there's a big funeral going on this morning and a big wedding this afternoon. So thank you for maneuvering, navigating through all the traffic. So I was just saying we're going to go till noon. We'll take a little break in between to stretch and just get our blood flow and use the restroom, which I believe is right around the corner. Okay. I'm still a little new to this parish myself. I've only been a parishioner here about 1.5 years. So I'm still getting to know everything here. So I want to tell you a little bit about my background, because I think it's like the background of many of you here. And it is one of the reasons that we find ourselves today struggling as a church. Okay, so I grew up at St. Casimir Parish, which is on the near west side of Chicago, little village area. It's now Our Lady of Tepeyac Parish. When I was growing up there back in the 60s, it was a Polish parish transitioning to Hispanic. So it became from 100% Polish to almost 100% Latino, mostly Mexican. If you still don't recognize the neighborhood, I call it the back of the jail neighborhood. So we're just a few blocks from Cook County Jail. So I'm an inner city kid. So anyway, I was born in '59, so I'm technically a pre-Vatican II child. And come on in, lots of places here. And I grew up in the 60s, and so I experienced some of the years of pre-Vatican II. I do have faint memories of the Latin Mass. I do have faint memories of the Baltimore Catechism, and many of the things that were staples for, come on in, make yourself at home anywhere, for many years. And then, of course, experienced the Second Vatican Council and all the changes that came with that. So I can speak to both experiences. So let me show you just a little bit of what that experience was like growing up in this very, very Catholic neighborhood. Because if you know anything about Polish people, Father Mizidlo, we're about 100% Catholic. Okay, Poles are pretty much Catholic. And then when the community changed to Mexican, they're 100% Catholic as well. So this is a very Catholic neighborhood. So back in the day, when there was feasts such as the Feast of Corpus Christi, the body and blood of Christ, there were processions through the neighborhood. And there were different homes in the neighborhood that set up Corpus Christi altars on their front porch. And the Blessed Sacrament was brought by the priest and a whole procession of people winding through the streets. They would stop at these various places, place the Blessed Sacrament there. Hundreds, if not thousands of people in the street would pray for a while, then they'd move on to the next little home altar. Does anyone remember anything like this? Father Mizidlo, it's a very Polish thing, I guess. Okay? So this was something that was very common. The whole neighborhood would turn out for something like that. This is my Aunt Roseanne, who is now 89 years old. This is her first communion. And look at that dress. Isn't that amazing? I mean, talk about an event going on in the life of this young lady. First communion, and you look at all the people gathered around this big community celebration. So again, the whole neighborhood, everyone celebrated together. This is a picture of the church at the 75th anniversary of the parish. And what I draw your attention to, this is a very big church. You can't see real well, but this whole side here, the reason you see a lot of black there, those are all nuns. So those are all, see all that black? Those are all sisters. So there's probably about 60 or 70 sisters, and this picture would have gone farther back. So those are all the nuns that were in the convent. And on this side, these are all the priests who, from the neighborhood parishes who came to come celebrate. And there's probably about 60, 70 priests over there. Somewhere around the edges were a few lay people like us that squeezed in. But, parishes had 5 or 6 priests on staff, 30, 40 nuns in the convent, okay? And so that was typical for us. This is another one of these experiences of an outdoor procession. This was a May crowning. How many of you are familiar with a May crowning? Okay, so a May crowning, again, the whole community would come out and procession around the block and around the church. It just so happens this young lady right here is my wife, Joanne. So she was in procession on that day. So this is a picture from her. It was interesting when we got married and we compared pictures. We had pictures from the same events because we grew up in the same parish and we went to the same school. So even though we didn't really know each other, our pictures are almost identical. We had the same experience growing up. This is another picture of, I believe this is on Easter morning, perhaps, when all the children would be in procession. We were always, Polish people love to have processions. Polish people, Hispanic people, Italian people, Filipino, there's a number of cultures and ethnicities that love processions. So they would wake us up at 5:30 in the morning to go to church to be in the procession at the 6 o'clock mass, and they put these little capes on us, and this is actually my brother Ron right there, there's my wife Joanne, they were in the same class together. There's all the girls from the high school, they're big to do, okay? This is a picture of my brother Ed at home playing mass. Okay. This was, we had a built-in china closet, and so this was the pre-Vatican II Mass with the priest facing out orientum, facing the altar instead of the people. But my mom got together a bunch of little vestments that she made, she sewed them together, and we all took turns playing mass in the home. So this is my brother Ed's turn, there's my brother John, now it's his turn to say mass. We had a schedule. There were 9 of us and 7 boys, so we had a schedule. My brother Tom, who today is a bishop, he was the pastor. He would make the schedule. From an early age, we knew something was going on here, but anyway, this next picture is really telling. Oh, so my mom made the vestments. She went to the dime store and she bought little goblets for our chalices, little plates for our paten. She built a little tabernacle out of cardboard and gold foil. Has anyone ever heard of that, playing mass at home?
Yeah, we do.
Some of you have? Okay. I'm just checking, okay? Because this is all going to lead to a point. I'm not waxing nostalgically here. This is all going to lead to a very important point. This is a picture of the congregation at one of our masses. What I want to point out about this is more than half the people in this picture are not from my family, they're kids from the neighborhood. Oh. Right? So you go out on the street and you ask your friends, hey, you want to come over and play mass? Okay. Now that's very foreign today, wouldn't you say? Yeah. I doubt there are kids running around on the block and say, want to come over and play mass? This is me right here on one of the altar boys. Got my little altar boy outfit on there. This is my sister Ramona, who is not a nun and never was a nun. My mother made an outfit so she could play nun. These are friends from the neighborhood, but the kicker of this whole picture is, you see what's happening here? My brother Ed is taking up a collection.
They're eating chicken pot popcorn.
He's walking around with the kitchen strainer. And our neighbor friends are gladly throwing in their change. So we Paprocki's, we're very entrepreneurial. I don't know, let's play mass. Now, all of this to say, I grew up in a Catholic bubble. Okay? I refer to it as a bubble. You can also refer to it as a Catholic ghetto. Many of our neighborhoods in Chicago were Catholic ghettos in the sense that people huddled together of the same kind. Catholics, when they came to this country, huddled together. The Irish, the Polish, the Latino, the Filipino, the Italian. We huddled together because this was a strange new land. And we grew up, many of us, in a Catholic bubble. How many of you would say you grew up in a Catholic bubble similar to mine? I'm curious. Okay, it looks like almost about 80% of you. And that's very typical in an urban area, especially, okay? Now, the point of all of this is, this bubble is gone. This bubble has burst. And it's not coming back, okay? So I say this right up front, I am not here to wax nostalgically about, we should go back to the way things used to be, kids should be playing mass at home, we should be having processions through the streets and Corpus Christi altars. That was all nice, that was all very good, but that bubble is gone. When I say the bubble, the Catholic bubble is gone. Our society has changed completely. So whereas people came here and huddled together in self-identifying groups, we now are more mobile, people come and go. Back in the day, when you got married and left home, that meant that you bought the house across the street. Okay? I know the Torpies still, they own like a whole block. You go to your son John and his wife Chris, and you live right across the street, and there's Torpies, every other home is a Torpie home. Okay? And that's how neighborhoods did that. So people today are much more mobile. We can go farther away. The world has gotten smaller. We're much more pluralistic. So whereas people, I thought the whole world was Catholic growing up. Okay? Kids don't think that anymore. They know that that's not true. It was years before I met a Protestant in person. Today kids are like, what's the big deal? Okay? I actually thought growing up that Protestants were someone I needed to be very careful around, because they might recruit me, take me away. There was a great suspicion between Catholics and Protestants. Heck, I remember as a kid one time watching TV, and I'm changing the channels. This is how we used to change channels. 2, 5, 7, 9. And I come across a guy on TV talking about Jesus, and I'm kind of fascinated by this. And I'm I usually don't see people on TV talking about Jesus. And I asked my mom, so I'm maybe about 7 years old, 8 years old at the time. I said, Mommy, who is this? And she's washing dishes in the kitchen. She looks in, she goes, he's Protestant, Joey, change the channel. Now, we laugh to that today to keep from crying, right? My mom is an angel, she's a saint. But she was taught that, well, that was Billy Graham on TV. Well, we don't watch Billy Graham. He's for those Protestants. So, our world has changed. We're much more pluralistic, we're much more mobile, we're much more multicultural, we're a much more secular society. So that bubble is gone. The problem is we are still operating our parishes in much the same way that we did when we were in the bubble. And that's one of the problems that we're facing. Okay, that's one of the challenges. We are yet to come to grips with how we need to change to meet the changing times. So, we're not in Kansas anymore. This is a phrase I like to use. Just like Dorothy, thinking, we're not back in this cute, safe little place anymore. Something has changed. So we need to be realistic about that. And I think one of the problems that we sometimes face is actually people being nostalgic about, well, we should go back to the way things used to be. The answer is always in the future. We can learn from the past, but we always have to move forward. And we may not like some of the changes that have happened in our society, but they've happened. And how do we deal with them? And how do we maneuver through them? That's the key, okay? It does us no good to wring our hands about it or to shake our fists at it. It's happened. And so now we have to deal with these changes and figure out how to move forward. One of the results of all of these changes, we know that over the past decade or two, a number of studies have come out in terms of how people are identifying with religion. And they're finding that all of the polls or surveys are showing what they call the rise of the nuns. Okay, N-O-N-E-S, not to be confused with the rise of the nuns. It sounds like a movie, doesn't it? The rise of the nuns mean that there are more and more young people especially who are no longer identifying as Catholic, even though they were brought up as Catholic. They went to a Catholic school, perhaps, or a Catholic religious ed program, and now are saying, well, I'm not affiliated with the church. Okay. In fact, they said that the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, if the nuns were a denomination in the United States, it would be the second largest denomination.
Wow.
That's how many people, especially young people, are simply saying, I'm not affiliated with an institutional church. I'm spiritual, but not religious. You've heard that phrase before?
Yes.
Especially young people are saying this, I'm spiritual, but not religious. They want spirituality, they want some kind of connection with God, but they don't want the institution. And that's a problem for us, okay? The result, of course, is we have lots of empty pews. I have been around to all of the churches that were mentioned at the beginning, Queen of Martyrs and St. Walter's and Christ the King and St. Barnabas and so on. And I've been in this neighborhood for over 25 years. All of the parishes are emptier than they used to be, across the board, okay? I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You go to church on Sunday, you look around and you see a lot of empty spaces that didn't used to be there. And so we have a challenge. We have to wake up and start doing some things that perhaps before we didn't think we had to do. Back in the day, back in the Catholic bubble, when someone moved into the neighborhood, it was on their list of things to do to go visit the rectory and register as a parishioner. That's not true anymore. It's the furthest thing from their mind. They're not thinking, oh, before we unpack everything, let's go to the rectory and register. Furthest thing from their mind. So we're the ones who have to go out and make first contact. We used to be able to just sit in our rectory, our parish center, and wait for the doorbell to ring. It's not ringing. It's not ringing anymore. So we're the ones who have to figure out how do we go out and invite people in. So when I started writing this book, in the introduction to the book, the first thing I thought of was the movie Apollo 13. And that famous line from the movie, Houston, we have a problem, right? You know, we as members of a church, we need to be realistic. We have a problem, all right? Now, I'm not going to spend time here going over the problem in further detail, otherwise you'll all be very depressed very soon. And I didn't bring you here to depress you, I brought you here to, let's talk about ideas for things we can do. But we have a problem, and we're being realistic, and I think that's why you're here this morning. I think you're here because you know we have a problem, and you're here to try to figure out what can we do about this. So that was the first line I thought of from the movie, but there's another line in the movie that I really like. The mission control operator, Gene Cranston was the real person's name, I forget the actor's name. He overhears a couple of the NASA officials lamenting this terrible problem of Apollo 13, and one of them says, this could be the biggest disaster we've ever faced in NASA history. And Gene Cranston replies, pardon me, but with all respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour. And in many ways it was. The wisdom and technological know-how that they put to work to get those astronauts home on a crippled ship was one of the best hours of Apollo 13. And that's the approach that I take in my book. It's a hopeful book. Yes, we have serious problems, but I believe in many ways we are about to enter into one of our finest hours of becoming more creative, becoming more intentional, becoming more active in our outlook as Catholics in reaching out. So I firmly believe that we're going to see some of our finest moments in the years to come as we tackle this problem. Earlier this year, John Allen, who writes a column about the Vatican, he summarized, he said, this is what our Holy Father wants. Pope Francis wants us to have a church that's on the move And so he put this article on his website, Crux. He said, in 2016, Pope Francis wants a church on the move. And I thought, well, isn't that nice? I just wrote a book about a church on the move. So, but I really felt like I was on the right path with what our Holy Father is calling us to do. That we have got to be a church that is moving. In fact, I'm going to jump ahead to a slide that I'll come back to at the end, but I think it's good to share it right now. I won't show the slide, but I'll share the story. There is a very good book which I recommend to all of you who are here today who are studying this problem. It's called Autopsy of Deceased Churches. Okay, I'll say the name again if you're writing it down. Autopsy of Deceased Churches. It may be singular autopsy of a deceased church. And I'll remember the author's name when we get to the slide later on. Anyway, the fellow who wrote this book has done studies of churches, not just Catholic parishes, but churches of all different denominations that have died. You know, they folded up shop. And he said in his autopsies of these churches, he found that they all have one thing in common. And he said that one thing in common is that they all turned their focus inward. All these churches had turned their focus inward. Meanwhile, the community around them was changing, and all they kept focusing on was this little insular group of people that used to come to this church, and now they've moved away, but they keep coming back, and so there's all these people coming back to this church here, but the people in the neighborhood don't even know it exists because it's changed. And so they said they die, churches die when their focus turns inward. And so the whole thrust of what our Holy Father is telling us, what I'm trying to say in this book is outward. Our focus has to be outward. We have got to be looking at how do we get out into the world, not just focusing in on our own insular little group. You know, how can we make our lives as Catholics more happy? That's certain, that's guaranteed that our churches will die. The real secret to this is how can we get out into the world and transform the world, which is what Jesus wanted in the first place. You know, his last words before ascending into heaven were, go. He didn't say, okay, gather around and let's just stay here together in this nice little bubble. He said, go, therefore, to all nations. So his thrust was outward. He said, we've got to go. And so that's the image that we need to keep in mind. All right, so we're going to talk about 5 different ways the church needs to change the way we do things. And so in my book, I talk about how a church on the move thinks, how a church on the move functions, how a church on the move worships, how a church on the move forms disciples in faith, and then engages the world. And I'm not going to give you all 52 ways today, otherwise you'd be here until about 5 o'clock. So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 from each of these 5 categories. I'm going to pause after each one so we can have discussion. You're here with lots of wisdom and experience, and I don't want to just talk at you. I want to hear your thoughts, your insights, your experiences. So we will pause from time to time, and I'll just say, okay, so, and that's going to be your turn. That's often very frightening to people when, you know, that's tossed out. I know I go to my spiritual director once a month, and after we exchange our niceties, she always says, so, that's my cue. I'm supposed to start talking now. I'm supposed to talk for the next hour about what's going on in my life. So when you hear that coming from me, if I say, so, that means I'm going to shut up now. It's your turn to talk. Let's talk about a few ideas about how we as a church need to think and how we need to change that. One of the first things that I mentioned in the book, in fact, I think it's the first chapter, is that moving forward, we have got to be a church that focuses, that thinks about how are we here to address the brokenness of people's lives. We sometimes fall into an approach of presenting our parishes as joining a country club. You know, come join this nice group of people, They're going to be fun, they're nice folks, you're going to have a nice time, we all get along, and we do nice things together. The fact of the matter is, young people especially today are saying, you know what, I can find that somewhere else. I can find a nice group of people to get along with somewhere else. We've got to be offering something that they can't get somewhere else. And that is the healing of Jesus Christ. And that starts by us focusing on the brokenness of people's lives. People, everyone that you meet, everyone in this room is carrying some kind of burden. And the reason most often that people come to church is because they want to share that burden with the Lord. They want the Lord to help them with that burden. And we don't often enough invite people in that way. I'll give you a good example of something that just happened recently here and in some of the neighboring parishes around here, but I'm only speaking from my experience at Christ the King, because this is where I go. About a month ago, remember we had a guest preacher come in and preach at all the masses about domestic violence? Remember? So those of you from Christ the King. It was a rather astounding weekend. Many people were sitting there thinking, we've never heard a homily like this before about domestic violence. And it was the priest who came in and spoke about this, he was a phenomenal speaker, and he was very blunt. And it was a rather raw homily about this issue, which he told us over and over again. He said, this is real, and it's in Beverly. Domestic abuse, it's everywhere. But we live in kind of our nice little, plastic houses sometimes, thinking that everything is all fine and good. And meanwhile, there are people hurting. And we don't often speak from the pulpit about issues that people are hurting from, and how we are here to bring healing and to bring help. I like to tell parents now, when I sometimes go out and do like First Communion meetings for parents, and I often address the issue that one of the difficult things is telling kids when they ask the question, why do we have to go to Mass? Why do we have to go to Mass? And I said that you can get into all kind of long explanations, but I've come to the conclusion that the best answer we can give them when they say, why do we have to go to Mass, is we respond by saying, because we're broken. And Mommy and Daddy need help to be good parents. You need help to be a good child. Get in the car. We're going because we need help. When you get down to it, the reason we go to Mass is the same reason that people go to a 12-step group. They go because they know that's where they're going to find healing. They don't go to a 12-step group because it's going to be fun and we're going to meet nice people, and okay, you can go anywhere to get that. But you go to a 12-step group because you're going to get healing for the brokenness in your life. That's why people come to church. We come there because we need to be saved. If we don't need to be saved, there's no reason to go to Mass. Bishop Barron talks about this. Bishop Barron says that Jesus is too often reduced to a nice guy, a good teacher, a good wise philosopher. He's just sort of a wisdom figure. He says we have got to proclaim Jesus as Savior. He said, if you imagine yourself sinking in quicksand, do you want a philosopher to come by? Picture that. You're sinking in quicksand and a philosopher comes by. Oh, this is interesting. Let's talk about your situation. You'd be like, shut up and save me. And he says, that's who Jesus is. He's here to save us from the quicksand of sin that is swallowing us up, all of us, because we're all human, we all sin. And so this idea of focusing on brokenness, we need to sit down as parishes and say bluntly and honestly, how are people in this neighborhood hurting? They're hurting from divorce and separation, they're hurting from broken relationships, they're hurting from unemployment, they're hurting from illness, chronic illness, loss of a loved one, sickness and disease. I could go on and on. How are people hurting, and what are we doing? What are we doing? And you're already doing many things, okay? Our parishes are doing a number of wonderful things, but these have to come to the forefront more. These are not side operations. Okay, the number of outreaches that our parishes have, they're not side operations. They should be the center. They need to be the center of who we are. So I've been telling parishes, I sometimes meet with parish staffs to work with them, and I ask them if they have a mission statement. And it usually was something that was developed like 15, 20 years ago. It's been in the bulletin ever since. And I often read them and then I say, you know what, get rid of that. Because most of these were written in very flowery terms. We, the people of this parish, are a loving, faithful community who gather together to give worship to our Lord. And they're all very flowery. And so I've been saying, get rid of these. Every parish should have a mission statement that reads more like this. And I'll use Christ the King as an example. We don't have a mission statement, but this is what it would sound like. We, the people of Christ the King, recognize and embrace our brokenness. We recognize Jesus as our Savior who heals us from that brokenness, and we invite you to experience that healing as well. That's our mission. We recognize our brokenness. We recognize and embrace Jesus as the one who heals that brokenness, and we want to invite others to the same. That's our mission. It's not very flowery, but it's really gets to the bare bones of what it is that we're doing. Okay? Let me share a couple more, and then I'll stop and we'll talk. All right. Another way we need to think as a church. Our Holy Father is telling us we need to be a church of joy. His first encyclical was about joy, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. We've got to be a church of joy. One of the things that I think can affect the way we express joy is through singing, which is why I had you start by standing up and singing something together. Singing brings out a joy that normally doesn't come out in any other way. It just lifts our hearts. You know, why do we go to musicals? You know, they're stories, but they break into song because that touches our hearts in a different way. It raises the level of joy. All right? So, you know, I see a Cubs fan here. I'm a Cubs fan. We're experiencing great joy right now, but not last night.
No.
Okay? And I was fascinated that as I went through Facebook this morning to see what people are sharing about last night's game, the majority of the posts are about Bill Murray singing the seventh inning stretch, the way Harry Carey used to. For 108 years, this has been the only joy that Cubs fans have had, is singing during the seventh inning stretch. You know, because for that one shining moment, it feels like maybe we can win. And then the eighth and ninth inning usually comes. Okay? But singing raises people's joy. And so the fact that we lost last night, the only thing people are sharing this morning is Bill Murray singing the seventh inning stretch, because that was the one moment of joy that we had in that game. We were shut out. There was nothing to cheer for except that seventh inning stretch. Singing brings joy. And so one of the recommendations that I have in my book is we need to sing every time we get together. Not just at Mass, but every time we get together, as simply as we did here. I have my little iPod and my little speaker. I have about 50 hymns on here that just by a touch I can load on and ask people to stand and we could sing. You don't need hymnals. All the songs that I've chosen are real short refrains, or there are mass parts like the Alleluia or the Lamb of God, but they're just ways of getting people to sing and express our joy together. Now this has been a tough nut to crack in this area, and I'm going to say something, and forgive me if I'm insulting anyone, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my experience is that Irish folks are not real keen on singing a whole lot when it's time for Mass. There's singing that happens in the family and you know, for celebrations, but when we get together, Mass is let's get this over quickly. Am I saying anything that is insulting anyone?
Yes, it's
Has this
certainly.
been an experience?
Yes, I'm Irish. We sing at Mass.
Say that again,
I
Helen?
said I'm Irish and we sing at Mass all the time.
Oh yeah, we sing, but I have found that there's a let's keep it short attitude. Have any
I
of you
think that's
experienced
a
that?
general attitude for most people. Because, you
Beyond
know,
Irish?
Keep it under an hour, I'm out of here, I'll find a new bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
my brother-in-law's Lutheran, and when his parents passed away, we went to the masses. They sang like every single verse of every single song that was, and everybody that was Catholic that was there was like, why are they singing every verse? It was like the longest like funeral mass, and it was like because, and my brother-in-law said, well, we do that at every mass.
Okay,
It's just like,
so that can be
way.
overkill.
well, I don't know, I enjoyed it, but I'm sure
It
my
can
brothers
be.
and
No, I'm
sisters
serious
weren't real
about
keen
that.
on it, yeah.
I know that there are parishes that have said, we need to sing more, so we will sing every verse of every song. Well, that's very mechanical, okay? And I'm actually not even talking so much about the Mass. I'm talking about when we get together in gatherings like this. We should be singing here. We get parents together for a parent meeting. We should sing something. Even if it's just a short hallelujah. Everyone stand, let's sing hallelujah, sit down. We've got to get the joy flowing a little bit more. And singing is a powerful way of doing it. The only reason I brought up this whole Irish thing is because Father Larry, our pastor here, responded to me that way. He's Irish. I was talking about this with the staff one day, and he says, that's going to be a tough one, Joe. He says, the folks around here really don't like to sing a whole lot. And that was his experience. So, that's the only reason I tossed it out. So I didn't want to say anything that ruffled any feathers.
Taverns are for.
Say it again?
Taverns are for singing.
That's funny. Actually, yeah, you go to the pub and there's no problem singing. But at church, let's get this over. Okay, so this is a mentality that we sometimes have is we do things in a rather perfunctory ways. Joanne and I have 2 children, they're both grown now, but I remember taking them through their first communion, their confirmation, going to parent meetings. And so they'd have these parent meetings for confirmation, first communion, reconciliation. And those were often some of the most depressing meetings I ever went through. Because we would sit down, and it was like a business meeting. There'd be a quick Hail Mary at the start. Let's say a prayer, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Amen, Hail Mary, fully grace, blah, blah, blah. And then here's the business, here's what your child needs to wear for First Communion, and here's the protocols, and does anyone have any questions, and so on. And you go through this, and you get like a 15-20 minute theology of the sacrament, and then go home. And it was just empty. There was no attempt to evangelize parents. That's what we're missing. We're missing every time we gather people together. Think about it. Every time we have people from school parents, for example, come to a meeting, these are people that we know are not at Mass every Sunday. Would you agree?
Yes.
Parents of many of the kids in the school, they're not at Mass every Sunday. Many of them are not evangelized. They're Catholic by baptism, but they have never had an awakening of their faith. They've never truly encountered Jesus. Every time we gather them, we have to think of as an opportunity to evangelize, an opportunity to introduce them to the joy of the gospel, an opportunity to help them feel as a part of the community. And so that's why I'm saying we can't just be perfunctory going through the motions. We've got to be more thoughtful and intentional. And I think singing is a big part of that. So that's just one of the ideas. I don't want to harp on it too much, but one more idea, and then let's chat. And we'll actually stretch a little bit after that. Another thing we need to do in terms of changing the way we think as a parish, as parishes. It's very common for parishes to have pledge cards occasionally for raising money. Parish has a capital campaign. We at Christ the King know all about that, right? We've had a huge capital campaign the past couple of years. Most parishes have stewardship campaign or capital campaign, or once a year or once every other year, pledge cards. And the pastor will get up and talk about what needs to be done. We need to fix the roof, we need to pave the parking lot, we need to do some bricks and mortar and so on. All necessary things. And then people are asked to pledge. Here's what I'm going to give. We need to also have discipleship pledge cards. Something that, let's say once a year, the pastor gets up at Mass and talks about what does it mean for every one of us to follow Jesus? And how do we practice that? A disciple of Jesus is someone who prays is someone who learns about their faith, study, is someone who gives not only of their money, but of their time and their talent, is someone who shares their faith with other people. Each parish should sit down and figure out what are the ways that we can help people to pray in this parish. Do we have programs going on that invite people to come together? What are ways that we help people to learn about their faith? What are ways that we invite people to spend their time sharing with others their gifts? What are ways we can help people to share their faith with others? The pastor can talk about this. I'm thinking Pentecost is a wonderful time to do this when we're talking about the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And then have people take that pledge card and check off, what am I going to do this year to be a better disciple of Jesus? See, right now, most parishioners, I shouldn't just say most parishioners, most of our parishes judge your good standing as a Catholic by attending Mass and turning in an envelope. I actually Googled this not too long ago. I Googled what makes a good parishioner, Catholic. I wanted to see what came up. First thing that came up was a parish bulletin, not in Illinois, some other state. And it said, a good parishioner is someone who attends Mass and turns in their envelope. That's it. That's not enough. That is not enough for people to show up and turn in an envelope. That's not what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And yet for most Catholics, that's what they're told is their expectation. You know, show up and support. And if we do that, we're pretty much, people feel satisfied. And we've got to invite people to find ways of identifying, how can I follow Jesus more closely? And how can this parish help me to do that? So I encourage parishes to think about, I made up this card. This is, you know, my own little mock-up of some make-believe parish, St. Anthony of Padua. So I made this up. You know, each parish can design your own. Figure out when you want to do it. But invite people, tell them, you know, what we need to do to be followers of Jesus Christ, and then ask them to commit to that as the year goes on. So these are just 3 ideas for some of the ways that we need to think as a parish. We're going to talk a little bit about how we function in a second. But let me pause here and begin inviting some of your reactions, your thoughts, your insights about anything that I've said or any of these ideas, or what you're doing at your parishes, or what you think should be done. So and I'm very patient. Yes.
I hate to go back retrospectively, but back in the day, we were pray, pay, and obey mentality.
Yes.
So to change that paradigm, I agree with 100% of what you said, but I guess my confusion a little bit now, and it's not confusion, it's just retrospectively thinking about it, is that back in the day you had all the priests, even our small little parish had 3 priests, and we had nuns. We don't have the N-U-N-S.
Yeah.
We don't have that now. So when we talk about why we go to church and what the church should function, and I do believe that that should happen, but I also think that there is an onus on one priest sometimes in one parish environment that is supposed to be everything to everybody. And in doing so, I'm just trying to figure out appropriate roles for laity to kind of mesh that brokenness, if you will, or whatever reasons that they're coming to church. And I'm not sure that that's embraced as universal as it should be. And so if we're trying to fill the pew, because I know the numbers are being counted, and if you don't have the numbers sitting in the pews, you may not have the building edifice there at all.
Right.
So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, realistically and pragmatically, how do you merge all that together? By using people who are, and no reflection on anybody here, because I'm a senior myself, but using people who are like under 30 to build the pews, because we're dying off. I mean, that funeral, I don't know who died, but it was probably somebody seasoned, if you will. So when that happens, you're left with trying to build a church environment or the edifice, let's say, and keep that together with those that are left in the pews. So I understand the word evangelization, I understand all of that, but I'm just saying pragmatically, how can that be implemented?
Okay, very good. You covered a lot there, and it's
I
really
talk a lot,
well
and I
said.
apologize for that.
No, thank you, that was really well said. And I'm actually going to address a couple of the things you mentioned a little bit later on, but I don't want to skirt responding, especially to the first thing you said about how, we used to have 3, 4, 5 priests in a parish and sisters, and they did it, and we would chip in and support and so on. That's all changed. Okay, most pastors are alone. Are you alone in your parish? Okay, Father Jim is alone. Here at CK, we're lucky that we have a pastor and an associate full-time. But our pastor runs the Catholic cemeteries. So in many ways, he's part-time here as well. All right, I should say he has 2 full-time jobs. All right, to get to what you're saying is, we have to change our total approach to how does ministry get done, and we have to enable more lay people to step up. We have to form more lay people. We have to create new leaders. We have to send people to and invest in their formation and in their training so that we can multiply the number of people who are doing ministry, and the target for that should be younger folks. And I'm going to come to a slide on that a little bit later on. We have got to identify younger people and invest in them. Because if we keep asking the same folks who are sporting a lot of gray hair or bald spots like me, we're dying out, as you said. We're the older people. What about the next generation? And we can't just wring our hands about that. We have to be intentional about identifying young people and then equipping them. And in many of all the ways that is done best is by investing in their formation. Paying for them to go to Chicago Scripture School, the Lay Ministry Formation Program, all different kind of programs they can go to become more formed in their faith. So you're absolutely right, we need to change our mentality. Now how we go out and do that, I'm going to address a few more of those things a little bit later on, but I did want to start with that notion of we can't rely on Father Jim, Father Larry, the pastor to do it all. And I think you know that. But I don't know that a lot of people in the pews know that. I think they tend to think that it's still sort of run the old way, that the pastor does all of that and we just support by turning in our envelope. We have to change that mentality. That's why I had that pledge card. People are not used to being asked to pledge how I'm going to contribute to the church other than giving money. I think that's a different mentality. So we've got to change that mentality.
All right, a lot of things you say I agree with, and that's why I'm here, because I do sense this. I've been a parishioner not in Beverly. I'm one of the people that go somewhere else where I feel like there's more of a mystical church where I can pray, where confession is offered before every mass, sort of thing. Where there's evenings of recollection, there are laity engaged in helping me even in my formation. But one of the things that I really like at these parishes that I go to is that the priest, although he may only be 1 or 2, he's very much visible at the masses. He's saying a very devout holy mass. He's going out and giving communion with whoever, even if he is not the one who said the mass, he's present giving the communion. So the priest is would you say, gives you the sense that someone is in charge of protecting the spirituality of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I feel like that's something I find missing on the south side in these parishes. I am sorry and I apologize to anybody here if I get you mad, but I just find sometimes the laity running all over the altar unnerving to me.
Mm-hmm.
And with all the sanitizing stuff going on, it drives me absolutely nuts. Whereas it's
Well,
different when I go
yeah.
into some of these other, and it's very holy mass, and it's, I don't know, it's very beautiful, and I always think of, and I won't go on too much, but I always think of 30-something, a show that was on years ago. And this young man walked into a synagogue, he was Jewish, and he hadn't been back, he had been away. And he walked in, and I think he sensed a holiness, you know, there was something there, and that's why he continued to go
Yeah.
back. And I feel like here I go into Christ the King, the tabernacle's in a separate room, people go through, and everyone talks after Mass, there's just not a sense of,
Okay, well, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I
cut
do
you
like-
off there
I
because
do
I do
like
not
coming
want us
here.
to be criticizing any one particular church.
yeah, I'm
You know,
not
let me take,
criticizing.
let
I
me
mean,
take
I
your
am-
comment and generalize it, okay?
Yeah,
The bottom line is that whatever we do, whatever parish, it needs to be done reverently. Reverence is not the monopoly of the priest. Lay people who do any ministry are called to reverence and holiness as well. And so to say that it's only the priest who's going to show that reverence, that's putting way too much on only the pastor. I see lay people in all of these parishes who do a wonderful, reverent job of their ministry because the priest cannot do it all. He cannot be the only person
No,
giving
that's not what I
communion. There
said.
need to be other people assisting, and those people are well-trained, they come forward, they're very reverent, and do a wonderful job. So I understand what you're saying about this notion of reverence, but I don't want us to get into criticizing
no, I'm
a
not, and I go
parish.
to church here, so
Okay.
it's not like I don't go to
Okay.
church, I'm just saying, I'm just pointing
Yeah.
out certain things that you might
I
not
understand
see
where you're coming
from
from.
someone who comes
Yeah.
from outside.
Mhm.
That's all,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to show like
I
someone who
understand
doesn't
that, I
feel
appreciate
quite.
that. Let's take a short break right now. Let's stretch for a moment if you want to step out and get fresh air, use the restroom. Let's take 5 minutes and then come back and we're going to plow through some more ideas,
And
okay?
if you did
So
not have a
stretch-
chance to sign in the back when you came here, some people came in late, if you wouldn't mind signing in here.
The second section we're going to go through is how a church on the move functions, some of the ways that we simply do things. One of the things that I focus on a lot is how as a faith community, we Catholics need to be much more inviting. When I talk about this, I really want to emphasize that the people who need to be inviting are not just the pastor and the staff. Okay, this is on us, the people who fill the pews. Okay, we're the ones. If we want more people to make our parish their home, we have to be the ones who reach out to them and make it and welcome them and invite them. I have found in my experience many Catholics go to Mass the same way we board a Southwest Airlines flight. I fly Southwest Airlines all the time. You know they have open seating. Okay, so I get my seat. Everyone, you get your seat, and then you try not to look at anyone as you're coming down the aisle because you don't want anyone to sit next to you. You know, you stretch out a little bit. You put your bag there, and we often go to Mass the same way. We get into our pew, and it's like we don't recognize the other people around us. And so what I've been telling people is if you want a parish to be thought of as a more welcoming parish, how about when you get to Mass and you get to your pew and you're about to enter the pew, you simply look at the people who are there and say, "Morning," and then kneel down and go in. Just a simple greeting. And if you're the people sitting there already, how about you're the one who looks up and says, "Good morning." That's all. I'm not saying you have to get up and love bomb them and give them hugs. But we've really got to reach out to people more. We've got to, after Mass, you see someone there that you haven't seen before, just go over and say hi. You see, especially a young family. A couple weeks ago here at Mass at Christ the King, there was a young family sitting 2 rows in front of us. Mom and Dad and 3 little ones. They must have been 2, 3, and 4 years old. And the energy those little kids have, those of you who raise kids or now have grandkids, those kids had a lot of energy, but they were really well behaved. So they were quiet, but they were energetic, and parents were picking them up, putting them down, trading them back and forth, picking them up, putting them down. But they were quiet. So at the end of Mass, as the mom was getting out, she's holding two kids, and the look on her face was like, and I said, your kids are really well behaved. And she stopped, she was like, she said, are you kidding? I says, I know they were rambunctious, but they were so quiet. You guys are really doing a good job with them. And she said, thank you. She felt so good to know that someone recognized the difficult thing they just did. Bringing 3 little kids to Mass and trying to keep them from wrecking the place. And what do we often do, and I'm guilty of this too, is we often give them the dirty stares. You know, be more quiet, more still, you know. And people simply don't come back. That's one of the reasons. They don't feel welcome. So we've got to be the people who go out and make them feel welcome. It's not just the priest at the door. It's not just the ushers, the ministers of hospitality. We have to change the way we go to Mass and really look around and say, who's here? And is there someone here who looks new? And without intimidating them, without drawing the spotlight to them, simply go over and say, hi, how are you? You know, I'm Joe. I've been here at Christ the King for 1.5 years, and I have met a number of people simply by forcing myself to go over and say hi. And that's not easy for me. I'm an introvert by nature. All right? Introvert means that I prefer to stay within myself. So to get up and go say hi to someone I don't know is not easy for me, but I've been forcing myself to. And I have met some really, really wonderful people here at Christ the King Parish. And so we've got to change that mentality. So I saw your hand up.
Yeah, in our church we've adopted a tradition. We do have greeters, we have people who welcome, not just the ushers. But the cantor, right before Mass begins, invites people to say hello to their neighbor, both sides, and to welcome them to introduce themselves.
Yeah, some parishes do that and feel comfortable with it. Others feel that's maybe a little too forced. You know, you have to decide in your own parish what works and what feels comfortable. But I think in an informal way, we have to recognize the need to welcome people. The reason I have this picture up here is one of the things that I experience all the time is we invite people to things, but we assume they know where to go. Because we assume the people are coming are people who always come. And so quite often, I go and give talks to places, and I can't find where it is. Because I'm in another state, another city, and some of these parishes, like Christ the King, there's 5 different buildings, you know, and I walk all over. Sometimes I spend a half hour lugging my projector and my books around, trying, this door's locked, this door's locked, and I'm like, why can't we put up a sign? Real estate people do it. You know, you're having an open house, they put up a sign, balloons, something's happening here. And what frustrates me is we're a Catholic church, we're a sacramental church, which means we're a church of signs. And we don't know how to put a sign up. All right? So I came here this morning, I brought 2 of my own signs to put up. Because no one had thought of putting up signs. I put 2 little signs outside there, and I hope that was something at least. But we have got to, every activity we do should be designed for the person who has never been here before. Will they be able to find it? How will they feel when they arrive? Will they feel like this is a clique and I'm the outsider? Or do they feel like they're welcomed and they're a part of something that they should be a part of? Every baptized person that enters is a full member. Okay? Yes?
I just have a suggestion. I mean, I'm like pretty involved in sports and I have been forever and ever, so I know where Christ the King is and I know how to get into Christ the King.
Yeah.
But the Christ the King parishioner should have like a sign on 95th Street or something directing people into how to get into this.
It is a bit
Parish,
of a
because
little,
It's an idea.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's really hard to find if I know, because I've been at the gym a million times.
And you have all these streets
But
that
people
have
say that to me all the
the
time. They're like,
cul-de-sacs
yeah, I was
down
late for
there.
this game, I couldn't
You
find
can
the
really get
gym, I
lost.
couldn't find the building. Yeah, and there's only like really one way to get in, right?
Yeah, Kathy?
I just had a funny experience when we were in Boston and in the morning, I was with some friends taking a class there, and we pulled out the yellow pages to try to find a local church, and there were all these other Protestant churches listed, but there was no listing for any Catholic church in the neighborhood. So we were like, wow, this is really sad. So when we got to class, the next day we said, you know, are there no Catholic churches around here? And the teacher said, oh, there's lots of them. And we said, well, they're not in the yellow pages. And she paused and looked at me befuddled and said, well, but we know where we are. I'm like, okay, but I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
What is this, a secret club? I'm a Catholic too, can't
Yeah.
I? It was amazing to me that their
Yeah.
thought was so, we already know where we're going, so why would we put something out there for someone else?
It's the mentality, we already know, and that's what I mean about that inward focus. We're just focused on those of us who are already here. Outward focus should always be the person who's coming here for the first time. That event should be designed to speak to them. What will it feel like to show up for the first time? Will they find their way around? Are there signs? Are there someone welcoming them? And are the people greeting them and welcoming them in as well? It's simple hospitality, and we take some of that, much of that for granted. I know one of the first weeks that I was here at Christ the King, I came to a morning mass. And it was one of the mornings where Father Larry was having his coffee and chat with the pastor. And so after the morning mass, he said, and don't forget, come over to the Gleason Center for the coffee with Father Larry. And so I thought, oh, I'll come over and you know, say hi to some people. Well, then I got caught up in church chatting with someone. And by the time I finished chatting, I turned around and everyone was gone. They had all come over here. And I didn't know where the Gleason Center was.
There's a sign right there.
Yeah, but I didn't know. I honestly didn't know where to go. I couldn't find the Gleason Center. I know it's right there, but I'm like, is it in the school building? Is it in a rectory? I don't know. And so it took me 15 minutes to figure out how to get here to the coffee. And so again, you know, for the new people, we've always got to be thinking, you know, how to reach out and invite them, make them feel at home. We need to, this is sort of reduplicating what I talked about, those pledge cards, but we have got to treat parishioners not just as people who have signed up to become a member of the country club, but as partners, like partners in a law firm. You know, you sign on to become a partner in a law firm, that means that you're expected to bring something to that law firm, as well as getting something out of being a partner. So we have to have expectations for parishioners. I think we're afraid to ask for expectations other than, you know, an envelope. And we've got to get more, we've got to do a better job of when people are becoming parishioners, of talking to them about what it means to be a parishioner and what kind of expectations are there for parishioners in Christ the King Parish or St. Walter Parish. We really need an orientation when someone becomes a new member of a parish. Not just a little welcome or not just filling out a registration card, but you know, here's a little orientation on what it means to be a parishioner in this parish. The more you ask of people, the more you're going to get from them. And if we have low expectations, we're going to get a low return. I know that as a teacher myself, I always had to have high expectations for my students. If you have low expectations, you're going to get a low return. High expectations, you're going to get more. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask one basic question. Who initiates all these programs? Is it the clergy or is it the lay people? Because if it's the lay people, they have to be pretty bold, you know, to say, now, what we really need in this parish is, and then are they going to start it? Are they going to organize it? First they have to go to the pastor? Could there be a day, maybe once a year, when anybody who wants to, the pastor would be sitting in a certain place, anybody with an idea, not that you're going to come and tell the priest what to do, but you're going to come and ask the priest, how about if we do such and such?
Absolutely. I think this has to be a team effort. It has to be the pastor and parishioners together. I think you have a nice model here of St. Walter. The pastor came, he registered, 12, 15 people. And so let's go together. My guess is that you guys want to talk about this. You're going to be working at this. It should be the pastor, probably the parish pastoral council. is your natural group of people to gather together. I know I went over to St. George in Tinley. They had me come out and speak to, the pastor was there, and the entire parish council, all the commissions, so they had about 40 people there. And they wanted this presentation so that after I leave, they would jump into it and they would figure it out together. They would talk these things over. And so it's the pastor and people together. So it has to, obviously no one layperson is going to march in and say, we should do things this way. That you can't have your own agenda, your own axe to grind. It has to be a vision of the parish, and the pastor has to be a part of that. And so these are things that have to be talked out at a level where everyone is involved, at least the leadership of the parish, which must involve the laity. So my hope is that some of you who came from a parish will go back and perhaps tell your pastor, I have a suggestion for you about how maybe our parish council can do things. If you go and tell the pastor, here's how I think you should do things, that's not really respecting, the pastor who's already working very hard. But I think any pastor is open to how can we make things better? How can we make things more alive? So that's a very good question. So let me share a few more here. Okay, this is to get at what you were talking about, the young people. We need to be a church that is promoting young talent. So I have a picture of Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga. You familiar with Tony Bennett?
Yeah.
He's been a singer, he's like in his 80s now. And his career has been revived in the past number of years by doing duets with Lady Gaga, who is probably in her late 20s, maybe. She's a singer,
Beautiful voice.
I have been doing presentations recently with a young lady from Green Bay. Her name is Julianne Stans. And we introduce ourselves as the Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga. I'm old enough to be her father. And when Loyola Press asked me to write a book about the spirituality of the catechist, I asked if I could have a co-author. And I went out and recruited this young lady. She's in her late 20s. To be a co-author. She's like, I've never written a book before. I said, I'll show you how. And so we wrote a book together. We've gone speaking together. She's becoming a big name across the country now as a young speaker. We've got to be intentional in finding young talent and then saying, you, I'm going to invest in you. You're the future. I shouldn't even say you're the future. You're the young church now. We need young people to step up. And so we have to be intentional about that. So anytime you're beginning some kind of a ministry or growing a ministry or trying to add people, I would say you need an affirmative action approach. You need to go out and identify young people and go up to them personally and say, you would make a good lector at Mass. You would make a good catechist. You would make a good member of the parish council. Young people are not going to say, oh, I want to sign up for that. Our millennials, they're not going to be, oh, I want to become this or become that. We have to be more intentional about that. If we just put announcements in the bulletin, we're going to get the same people, and they tend to be, 50 and over. And so we've got to be more intentional about that. Look for the Lady Gagas.
I have to tell you, I would have never listened to Lady Gaga, and I saw her on with Tony Bennett. She is amazing, and I would have never listened to her, never.
She is. She has an amazing voice, and I'm not offering this as an endorsement of her. As a person, I'm simply showing the fact that Tony Bennett saw the wisdom in associating himself with young talent. His career has revived because of being associated with someone that millennials know. There are college kids all over the country now listening to Tony Bennett because of Lady Gaga. See how that works? So it's benefiting her career, but it's also benefiting his. So we benefit when we bring in young people. The sales of that book that I wrote on the spirituality of the catechist are benefiting because my friend Julianne, who I co-wrote it with, has millions of friends, and they're all buying this book, and I'm like, hey, keep it coming. It's wonderful. So I benefit from sharing the spotlight with her. I do not feel like, oh, I want the spotlight myself. I've shared it with her and I benefit from that. So we benefit as a church from this as well. Let's talk about this worship category, and then we'll ask for more discussion. How we as a church worship. I could do a whole workshop on this. But suffice to say, and this is the point I want to make about it. My experience of worship on the south side of Chicago, so I'm not singling out any parish, in general, my experience of worship on the south side of Chicago tends to be rather perfunctory, is the word that I use, perfunctory, which means that we do it, and we sort of do it in a manner that is, let's do this because this is the way we've always done things, and there's not a whole lot of effort and life and creativity going into it. It's more or less, let's just do this the way we've always done things. Now, the example that I like to use in this, so I would say the word perfunctory, is when I think of a married couple. So when you're dating, you go out of your way to impress the other person. I can give an example of this. You heard in the news yesterday that the Willowbrook Ballroom burned down. All right, that is so sad for me and my wife. That's where I proposed to her. And so I was, 34 years ago this November, really wanted to impress her, and got all dressed up and went out for dinner at the Willowbrook, and I proposed to her there. Sometimes as the marriage goes on, you become very comfortable, and you just start to feel like, well, I don't really need to impress the other person anymore. So it becomes more perfunctory. And relationships need to keep that life going. The reason my wife and I are so sad about the Willowbrook burning down is not that it's just a memory from 35, 36 years ago. We've been going dancing there ever since. About once a month, we've been going dancing. We get dressed up, we go out on a date after all these years, so that our marriage does not become perfunctory. I think that we can sometimes fall into doing Mass, doing our worship in a perfunctory manner. There is a very fine line between routine and ritual. A routine is something that you do the same way all the time with very little thought. So every morning we all go through our own routines, right? You wake up, you can walk into the kitchen with your eyes closed, turn on the coffee, walk over, open up the refrigerator with your eyes closed, get the cream out, We go through a routine without any thinking. A ritual is something that we do the same way all the time with deep thinking. See what a fine line there is? Ritual can sometimes become routine. And I fear that too often our worship has become routine. And so I advocate, and I have chapters about many of these things, we need to have a more robust approach to the way we worship. More robust ritual, more robust processions, robust music, robust silence. You talked about reverence before. Sometimes we feel like we have to fill every minute of the liturgy with sound. And one of the most profound ways that God speaks to us is in silence. And so if we want the Mass to have a more reverent feel to it, we need to have more silence. I'll give you an example of a parish that does this really, really well. St. Julie Billiard out in Tinley Park. If any of you have been to Mass there, before Mass, the lector, whoever it is, gets up and introduces the theme, has a few announcements, and then says, let's take a moment to center ourselves as we prepare to enter into this celebration. And then there's silence for about 30 seconds. And then everyone stands to join in the opening song. Then after each reading, when the lector gets to the end of the reading, they read the last sentence of the reading, and then they step back for about 10 seconds. and they step back up to the microphone and say, "The word of the Lord," and people respond, "Thanks be to God." It's beautiful. It says to us that I just proclaim something profound, let it echo in your heart, as opposed to, I finished the reading, the word of the Lord, thanks be to God. Now we do the psalm response. You know, we can get perfunctory. Robust means let's take our time with some things and do them richly and deeply and with that reverence that we were talking about before. All of us are called to do this more reverently. So that's why I have this picture here, you know, more robust sacramentals. This is of Holy Saturday. There are a number of churches that baptize this way. I go to different churches on Holy Saturday, and when they baptize people, this particular parish, that's one picture for each person of the Trinity. So I baptize you in the name of the Father, a full pitcher of water. Refill. In the name of the Son, a full pitcher of water. Refill. And of the Holy Spirit. This person is drowning.
In the Holy Spirit.
Because holy water is supposed to be a robust symbol. We die and are born again. So this person drowning, I'm not saying that facetiously. We are meant to drown in holy water and then to burst forth with new life from the holy water. And so, you know, how often do our baptisms done, you know, very perfunctorily with, you know, a little ding, ding, a couple of drips of water. You know, I get it, but it needs to be robust. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about how we worship, but my one word I want to offer to you is that word robust. Doing things robustly. So let's pause here for a moment and see what other thoughts you have about what I said about worship, or some of the things we talked about before earlier, also about the way we function as a church before we move on. Any thoughts about any of this? Yes, sir.
A few years back, we had a Good Friday service. And at the end of it, the pastor at the time stripped the altar, as the priest always does, and took all the linens and everything into the sanctuary. Then he came out and he explained what he had just done. The air went out of the church. You don't have to explain it. It is obvious. The more you explain it, the less meaning it has.
You're right.
And he never did it again.
You're right.
He never
That's a good
explained it
point.
again.
Yeah, just do it well, do it reverently, and it speaks for itself. You don't have to explain a hug, right? You don't have to explain a kiss. You just do it well, and the message is delivered. You don't say, well, now I just embraced you as a way of showing that. You don't explain it. You just do it well with the love that you want to deliver. So you're right, absolutely right. If you do the Mass well, it will speak to people. My mom became a Catholic when she was 13 years old. She's now 89, still with us. And she became Catholic because her best friend was Catholic. And she went with her wherever she went, including on Sunday morning. She started going with this friend to Mass. And she was intrigued by what we Catholics do, especially when her friend and her friend's parents got up to go to communion. My mother didn't know what that was. And so she asked her friend's mom after Mass one day, she said, what do you go up there to get? She was intrigued by this. And her mom said, oh, babe, that was my mom's nickname. She said, oh, babe, the greatest gift you could ever imagine. That was her explanation. She didn't go into detail about, well, we receive a little wafer that's transubstantiated into the body and blood of Christ. She just said, greatest gift you can ever imagine. My mom already knew something special was going on. And then to hear that person say, receiving the greatest gift you can imagine, just spoke to her heart. She's like, I want that then. And many people are drawn by the Catholic liturgy. It's one of the most powerful ways that we can evangelize, is by doing liturgy well, so that when people come for the first time, it speaks to their heart and their hearts burn a little bit. They're like, that spoke to me. I'm not sure what it said, but it spoke to me. And so we have a powerful evangelizing tool, is the Mass itself. What else? Anything else, Kathy?
I just want to add one quick thing I found out about young people. I'm a mom of 4 millennials, and I think I associated the fact that with their being more spiritual and not religious with meaning that they would not be interested in participating. And I found that to be completely false, not only with my kids, but other young people. I think we sometimes judge them with what that would mean if it was me,
Yeah.
and they're not of that same mindset. So I would say don't be afraid to ask a young person, because often that's all they're waiting. They really want to belong, but they're not going to say themselves, and they might be a little hesitant, but it's almost biblical. If you reach out to them, they'll say, oh, no, not me. But if you say, yeah, I think you, they do really respond to that. And I think sometimes the thinking differently is, don't think that because they're not actively involved or they're even regularly in the pew or you only see them periodically, that means they're disinterested.
Right.
It just means they associate and connect in a different way, and they might very well just be waiting for someone to say, you belong here.
Absolutely, Kathy, that's a good point. And the other thing too, I mean, our young people, one gentleman was asking me during the break, I think you were, what are some of the reasons young people are not coming back? And I mentioned one of the reasons they tell us, young people say, my spiritual needs are not being met. We hear that from young people. We can debate that, but that's what they're saying. Our liturgy, when it's done well, is such a spiritual experience. It will speak to young people. Millennials do not necessarily want the cool Mass. They don't necessarily want the Mass with a rock band. They don't necessarily want a Mass with a big screen, arena type feel. They want the Mass, they want worship done well. And so that's one of the problems, again, that I see with some of the other books that have come out about, how to revive the Catholic Church. They're basically saying that we all need to become like Willow Creek Church, that big non-denominational church has 10,000 people coming, and they have, these great dramatic presentations and big screens, and they have rockin' music. That's all wonderful, okay? But if we do the Catholic Mass well and richly and fully, we have everything we need. We don't have to become Willow Creek Church. We don't have to try to look Protestant or anything. We should be who we are and do it well. And one of the reasons that young people aren't feeling that is when they go to Mass and it's done perfunctorily. What do I mean by perfunctorily? I mean things like sitting there at Mass, and as the Mass is beginning, procession is coming down the center aisle, and there's someone running around the sanctuary lighting the candles. And then after the greeting starts, there's someone running out to put the gifts on the table. It's like, did we know there was a Mass going to be happening here? Could we not light the candles 10 minutes before Mass? Could we not put things in place? So perfunctory meaning, oh yeah, this we got to get this done, and it doesn't matter when we do it. Yes, it does. Does it look like we are waiting or anticipating a profound experience? When people walk into church, do they get the feel that something profound is about to happen? Or is it simply the 11 o'clock Mass is going to happen? Okay? Something has to speak to people about profundity. Otherwise, there's no reason to come. It has to be an experience of something beyond our everyday experience, something that lifts us up. All right, let's talk about a couple more. We have 10 minutes left. How do we form people in faith, a church on the move? We need to be better at instigating. And I shouldn't say rather than indoctrinating, but in supplementing that. What do I mean by this, instigating? We tend to be a church that indoctrinates. So we have children come to us and we indoctrinate them. We have adults come to us for the RCIA and we indoctrinate them. And then, towards the end, we invite them to do some kind of a service project. So kids come to us in Catholic school or religious ed, and we indoctrinate them. And then in the 8th grade, we say, now you have to do 20 hours of service to get confirmed. So we indoctrinate, and then we instigate. Instigate means involving them in action. I think we have that backwards. We need to instigate from the get-go. We need to be putting people into action the moment they come on our doorstep. We need to have young people in every grade of religious education involved in service, not just the 8th grade. So I'll give an example. A couple of years ago, I was a catechist over at St. Cajetan Parish, getting my bearings right. So I was a catechist at St. Cajetan, and the director of religious ed there, Deb Brakey, wonderful lady, and she said at my first catechist meeting, she said, oh, and a reminder, all 8 grades are expected to do a service project with your children. Not just the 8th grade confirmation, all 8 grades. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I was teaching 6th grade. So I arranged for, take the kids to the Ronald McDonald House over by Christ Hospital. And the kids, in conjunction with the parents, prepared dinner. They prepared meals. And so the parents dropped the kids off, the kids brought meals in, we went into the kitchen, we reheated, we served the meals for the guests of Ronald McDonald House. They bussed the tables for the whole dinner time. They cleaned up everything. They talked to the people at the tables. We cleaned up the kitchen. So an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then the parents came and picked them up, and they went home. At the end of the year, when I surveyed the kids, we evaluate how the year went. And I want to know, what did you enjoy best? What was the most impactful thing? My classes, my presentation, PowerPoints, my activities, my creative activities. Every student said their favorite session was going to the Ronald McDonald House. Every student. And it wasn't just that they didn't say, oh, it was because it was fun, we got to get out of class. They said things like, it made me feel really good to help people. I really enjoyed seeing the looks on the parents' faces when we were serving them. I felt so bad for them, and we were there to lift their spirits. We teach the faith by helping young people to practice the faith. And I think we wait too long sometimes. And we want to make sure they've memorized all their doctrinal formulas before we've awakened a missionary spirit. And our Protestant brothers and sisters actually do this very well. They involve young people, they don't call it, we call it works of mercy, they call it mission. So, if you're in 1st grade, you have a mission. What's your mission? 2nd grade mission, 3rd grade mission. Every kid is involved in mission. I think we can do a better job of that. The other thing that happened too that night, when the parents dropped off the kids, we could only have 10 people volunteer, and we had 10 students. So the parents couldn't come. I wish they could, but they couldn't. Half the parents who dropped off their kids asked if they could come in and help. On no other night of that year did the parents drop off kids and ask if they could come in and help me teach. Okay? No other night, but on the night we were serving people, half the parents said, oh, can I come in and help? They were happy to do that, which says to me, one of the ways that we form adults is not always through indoctrination first. I think service is a big way that we can invite millennials, adults, young adults, into an experience of church. They're willing to help other people. They want to help other people. And there's a chance that you'll get more people come to that than if you say, we're going to have a 6-week class on the Nicene Creed. Which is fine, we should all learn the Nicene Creed, but that's not how we draw them. See what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I think we draw people through these acts of service to others. Okay. Forming small faith groups is, I think, an integral thing that parishes need to concentrate on. People need to feel that they're connecting with other people. And it's difficult to do in any kind of a large setting. And most of our parishes are, even if we think of our parishes as small, Christ the King, St. Walter, we might think of our parishes, we're smaller parishes. Compared to most Protestant churches, we're huge, right? And people sometimes can feel lost in a big crowd. Forming small faith groups is a vital strategy. We started here at Christ the King last Lent, forming small faith groups. And during Lent, we had about 80 people sign up, which for a parish that gets about 500 people each weekend for Mass total, to have 80 people involved in small faith groups for 4 weeks during Lent, I think is pretty good. And then we just did it again in October. We had small faith groups for the Year of Mercy. 4 weeks, we had 7 groups, we had about 90 people sign up. Some of the ladies right here were in a small group. I know Helen and Irene were in a small group on Wednesday. I know St. Barnabas has small faith groups, and you host one in your home, don't you? We've talked about that. It makes a big difference, and these do not become insular groups. They're groups that are always welcome to newcomers. But if we, and another thing that I've learned from studying some of those mega churches like Willow Creek and so on, they said that while they have 10,000 people coming there for worship on the weekends, the secret to their success is small faith groups. They said we have 10,000 people coming to worship, we have about 12,000 people in small faith groups. So their hugeness is made possible by their smallness. Okay? So think about forming small faith groups as a powerful way of mobilizing parishes. Last thing I want to suggest for how we form people in faith, we need to get adults themselves talking about their faith. This is a picture of a First Communion meeting I did at St. Catechesis a couple of years ago. Deb has asked me to come over and do presentations there for the parents who come when their children are receiving First Communion. And I told her a couple of years ago, I said, you know what, I'm not going to do these anymore unless you invite 4 or 5 parents who went through last year's First Communion to sit on a panel. And I'll give them questions ahead of time that I'm going to ask them, and I want to interview them in front of the other parents and have them share their experience of bringing their children through First Communion. So now when I do a parent meeting, I do like 20 minutes of, giving a little foundation for the Eucharist, but then I say, now let's hear from some of your peers. And these people come up, so these were 4 parents whose kids went through First Communion the year before, and then I invited them to share their experience of bringing their children to First Communion. And this was much more powerful than anything that I shared as the guest speaker. Now they were hearing their peers talking about bringing their children to First Communion. And the one example that I still think of is this guy sitting on the end. Maybe you can't see real well, just turn the lights off for a second, maybe it'll show up a little better. He doesn't look particularly thrilled, he's just sitting there like this. Well, it turns out he's a Chicago cop, so he's kind of a tough guy, but he volunteered to do this. I asked the question, can you describe the experience of bringing your child to First Communion last year? What was that experience like? It's just a general question. And when it came to him, after these other people talked, he took the microphone and he said, bringing my daughter to the Eucharist was the most important thing I've ever done in my entire life. Then he passed the microphone on to someone else. He's just one of these, man of few words, outside Chicago, blue-collar guys. Those few words were the most profound words of that night. To hear a neighbor, a dad, a cop say, bringing my child to the Eucharist is the most important thing I've ever done in my entire life. We need to help our parishioners to share their faith with each other and not just have experts like me, ringers, come in and throw things at people. We need to have people sharing their own faith as well. So think about using formulas like this. I told Father Larry, I said, next time we have a parish mission here, is that we have a guest speaker come in. You can still have a guest speaker, but how about after the guest speaker, have 3 or 4 parishioners come up and form a panel and ask them to respond. What did you just hear? What was a main point that you think was a great point? What was something that you want to reiterate? get our parishioners up sharing their faith. And that's also a way of helping them to grow and become a church on the move. Okay, I'm going to show you one more thing, how we engage with the world. I told you about that Autopsy of a Deceased Church. The author's name, Tom Rainer, R-A-I-N-E-R. Okay, good book. Autopsy of a Deceased Church, Tom Rainer, R-A-I-N-E-R. I want to, I think this is my last one here, yeah. I encourage all of our parishes to figure out some way of going door to door in our communities. Door to door ministry. Now, this is something that a lot of us as Catholics balk at. We don't like when people ring our doorbell and say, "Are you saved? Have you met Jesus? Have you accepted Jesus as your Savior?" We don't like proselytizing. Catholic door-to-door ministry is not proselytizing. It's a ministry of hospitality. It's a ministry of going out and ringing a doorbell and saying, "Hi, I'm Joel, and this is Irene, and we're from Christ the King Parish. Just wanted to introduce ourselves and let you know that we're here down the block, and here's some literature about our parish. There's a parish bulletin, and just wanted to see, is there anything that you'd like us to pray for? Is there anyone in your family you'd like us to pray for? Any need? Is there anything we can do for you at all? Anything we can help with?" And just thank them for their time, and you're on your way. So it's not proselytizing. It's not trying to get them to become Catholic. It's not trying to even get them to come to Mass. It's just saying, "Hi, we're your neighbor." And there are Catholic parishes that are doing door-to-door ministry and are finding great success in that as a way of letting the neighborhood know, yes, there's a Catholic church here. I had an experience much like Kathy's when you went to that place where you said all these other
Boston, I don't
places.
want to shun Boston, but that just happened to go.
When my wife and I moved into Evergreen Park, within a week, there were brochures in our mailbox from about 20 denominational churches.
Wow.
This Baptist church, this Methodist church, this Pentecostal church, all these flyers showed up in our mailbox. Not one from a Catholic church. And there's Catholic churches all over here. And so we have to have a mentality of getting out and letting people know, we're here, we're your neighbor. We want you to be a part of us, as opposed to we have this kind of, well, we're going to wait for you to come to us. We can't do that anymore, folks. It's not working. Many folks who, if we ring their doorbell, will be pleasantly surprised that, hey, you know what? That was the Catholic church just stopped by. I didn't know there was a Catholic church over there. I didn't know there was Christ the King here or St. Barnabas there. Because they probably weren't looking for a church. All right, so this is part of our evangelization. So if you're looking in your parish to begin a door-to-door ministry, do some research on this. Look up some dioceses. I think in the St. Louis Diocese, I think in Columbus, Ohio, there are programs where they're doing door-to-door ministry and finding it very successful. There was a priest up at Mary's Seat of Wisdom Parish. It's not the pastor. Father Gunderson is the pastor. They had an associate there. I don't know if he's still there. This was a year ago. He was doing door-to-door ministry, and he was very excited about it. Not he alone. He had parishioners doing door-to-door ministry. And this is one of the ways that we get out of ourselves and become a church on the move. All right, the bells are ringing. That's the church's way of telling me it's time to stop. Thoughts, comments, insights, stories, anything you want to share as we wrap up?
I thought it was kind of interesting when you first introduced yourself and you said you were from Evergreen Park and not like a parish. And then you were talking about you were like Christ the King. And just recently I was dropping something off for a friend, and I know her little guy goes to St. Christina, and yet they live in Queen of Martyrs where I teach. And I was like, it's just like people are shopping around, people are looking around, and it's like everybody I think is still of the same mentality. We're this parish, we live in these boundaries, you should come to our church. And they don't, feel like they have to go out there and like work at it or anything.
Boundaries mean nothing to millennials.
No.
Parish boundaries mean nothing to them. Evergreen.
Well, you're not a millennial
So,
though, but
yeah.
you lived in Evergreen. Were you in a parish there?
We actually live in St. John Fisher Parish.
Oh, Fisher, okay. That's where I'm from
We shopped
too.
around for many years.
I grew up in Fisher.
We also did not register the parish because I travel so darn much. I'm hardly ever at Mass on Sunday at the parish where I live. I'm almost always on the road somewhere. But about a year and a half ago, my wife and I said, you know what, we should need to register the parish. We need to be buried from a parish somewhere. And we chose Christ the King because I've known Father Larry for over 30 years. He was a student at Quigley South when I taught there. So I didn't actually teach him, but I knew him as a student. And so I felt very comfortable coming here with a pastor that I knew personally. So yeah, but you know, millennials, if they are looking for a church, they're going to shop around. They're not going to look up whose boundaries are we in.
Yeah.
It's not important to them anymore. What else? Yes?
Since you invited Vicariate 5 and I found the information in our bulletin, is Bishop Whippage in any way connected to this program, and is he encouraging every pastor to invite the
Well, I
parishioners
think,
to do
Bishop
this?
is involved with the ministry commission in the sense that it's under his umbrella. I don't know how actively he is involved in each and every, but Kathy can maybe speak to this a little bit.
And
She's on the commission.
What I'd like to do is actually introduce you to somebody who is quietly sitting here videotaping you, who happens to be he works now very closely with Bishop Vippick. His name is Nicholas Carlson. He's our Vicariate 5 Parish Vitality Coordinator. So he's incognito today as the technician, but he's actually someone you probably want to get to know because his entire function is to help parishes become more vital. So what we're doing today is his umbrella. So if you have a minute to introduce yourself or get in connection with him, I'm sure he's really curious. He just recently began, July. So you may not know him yet, but this is not by accident, this is divine providence that he's here today. It really is, because he's the one in this Vicariate who will keep moving the Vicariate forward. So
Let's welcome Nicholas.
If I could just briefly respond to your question too, the bishop is very much engaged, and part of his pastoral priorities are focused on thinking outwardly in that sense.
So is he gathering the pastors?
Well, the deanery, he attends the deanery meetings and speaks to them individually as well. So there's a common plan of pastoral priorities that we're all working on together.
So then when I go back to my pastor, he's well informed on this.
He may be, depending on.
Since he put it in the bulletin,
Yeah, so
I'm presuming
he should be then.
he's
Yeah.
approving it.
Yeah.
And let me offer this to you as well, and with Nicholas, it's very fortuitous that I got to meet you today as well. I live in your backyards, okay? I'm more than happy to arrange to come to your individual parishes to help sit down and to talk through, work through some things as well. I can do that because I don't have to go to an airport to get to your parishes. I normally do not visit individual parishes around the country. I do regional talks, I do diocesan talks. But I'm more than happy to come if your pastor is interested in taking on this notion of parish renewal, parish vitality, and you think that some of the ideas from my book could help to charge that discussion. So what I'm offering is not a program. It's a discussion starter. It's ideas that you'll say, hey, why don't we do this or why don't we do that? It's going to get people thinking. I'm more than happy to come, and Nicholas, keep in touch with me. I'll give you my card. If I can be of help to parishes in the Vicariate, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Yeah. And just so that everyone's aware too, I mean, the whole Archdiocese is undergoing not a program, but a sort of change in mentality in that sense too, which they're titling Renew My Church, as you may well know. So.
Yeah, I mean, a small example I mentioned about the small groups here at Christ the King. Father Larry said we have a great school, we have a wonderful parish, people who love each other very much and get along. We have a great service program, they call it the Fiat Lux program, great volunteer service, he said. And at the time he says, we have a huge capital campaign. He says, but we're hardly doing anything for the spiritual enrichment of our people. And so he wanted small faith groups. And so we sat down and we figured out how to do it. Like I said, getting 80, 90 people. We think that's a huge step forward for Christ the King to be doing something that has not been happening. And when Father Larry approached people, like on the parish council about it, they looked at him like he had 3 heads. He told me this. They were like, you want us to talk to each other about our faith? People were not accustomed to this. Now, I know some people had gone through the CHIRP program years ago, so some people were, but a lot of people were like, we're not used to sharing our faith. But once the ball got rolling, people started signing up, and people came. And I had a group, I hosted a group during October for the Year of Mercy. I hosted it at Cork and Kerry, down Weston Avenue, the bar. We used a small room in the back. I had 8 people, part of my group. None of them knew each other. They were all parishioners of Christ the King. None of them knew each other, so they all were people who got to make new friends. I think that's powerful. There's 8 people now who, I just saw one of them on Sunday when I was here for Mass, and I was able to say, oh, hi, you're Brian, and I introduced my wife because of the small group. So it's a way of bringing people together and growing the parish from the inside out.
Is this, Joe, kind of like the old CFM? You know, they used to have the Catholic, I don't even know what it stood for.
Family.
Because we had some neighbors and they were CFMers, we called them, you know, and they were just the nicest people, and they all, to this day, they still get together and stuff.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
But it was a
It's
small
lasting
group.
impact.
You know, they did things together and they met at people's homes and stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's why, like I was talking to Pat a couple of months ago, you said you hosted a group, and then after the program ended, you guys just kept meeting, right?
We did.
And are you still meeting, or did that
No.
finally, okay.
Went on for 3 or 4 weeks, and
Okay. Yeah.
said we'll see you
Mhm.
on Christmas.
Okay, so this was in your home,
Yeah.
and you had about how many people coming regularly?
5, 6, 10.
Okay, yeah, so I shared with you maybe about 12 ideas today out of 52. There's more in the book. Again, they're for sale if you want to pick that up, take it back. I thank you so much for coming. You're people who are passionate about bringing your parish to life, and take the word back, talk to the pastor, find ways that parish council can come together. Sir, you wanted to share something?
Sure, I thought one brief encouraging thing, our parish at St. Walter's, we've had several grammar school children who became so devout that their parents converted to being Catholics.
Oh, nice.
So
Yeah.
we've seen the youth bringing their parents into the
Yeah,
faith.
that's wonderful, and that's we always have to be conscious of the fact that the new evangelization is telling us that we don't have to go to foreign countries to evangelize. If you have a Catholic school, and I think all the parishes here have a Catholic school, you have a number of parents who are not evangelized. And so the fields are ripe right here. We don't have to go to a foreign country. We need to evangelize the people who are right in front of us, but they've not encountered Jesus. And so the parents in the Catholic school, that's one of the first places to start. Pay more attention to them. Meet their spiritual needs. Invite them to get to know Christ more. And then the parish grows that way. So let me thank you before I turn it back over to Kathy. Thank you for coming.
And I also want to thank you for being here this morning. It was wonderful. And we will get this video up on our Ministry Commission website. So if you want to watch this again or share this with someone else, or if you go back to your parish, I'll try to set a goal within the next 2 weeks that it's up. So if you don't have this book, grab one from the back. The Growing with God is the book from the Vicariate 5 Ministry Commission. And our website is ministrycommissionv5.com. And this will be one of the very first videos that we are going to post for our online library, because we try to provide lots of formation and opportunities for you to think and grow in your faith, but it's not always at a time where you can be there, or you need to take it back to where you're going. You're the missionary who's here today. Bring this with you so you'll be able to get it off of our website. So thank you again. Let's. You're not being videotaped. Only Joe is being videotaped. The camera is going this way.
Nicholas, what's your last name?